So instead, over the years, I've worked with various highly successful leaders and organizations, helping them be even more successful. I've worked for many years with Nortel Networks in the middle there, DARPA-funded project to do DARPANet. And I was, in all seriousness, I wasn't trained as a clinician. I was trained as a mathematical psychologist to develop mathematical models that could predict human behavior, decision-making, that sort of thing. And so I got recruited to work on DARPANet to figure out why people might adopt it and why decision makers might spend millions and millions of dollars to deploy it. So ultimately developed the foundations for our commercialization strategy and was then put in charge of implementing it. And I drove it from startup to a business that contributed many billions of dollars to profits and share price. And then left to do my own project I fondly refer to as a dot bomb, so you all know how that went. But ultimately, some successful things got acquired by Oracle, and I've had lots of fun over the years working on various kinds of innovation. Okay, along the way, I co-founded the MIT Innovation Lab with Professor von Hippel, who's pictured there. Eric and I both shared the view that users and customers are extremely important sources for ideas on how to innovate, how to create value. And my motivation in co-founding the lab with Eric was really, I wanted to understand how to do a better job of innovation, how to get better returns on my innovation investments. And so we recruited 3M and a number of other interesting organizations from the get-go. And once we got over beating our chests and bragging about how great we were and started sharing our pain and sharing our mistakes and our what kept us up at night, then we really began learning more from each other on how to systematically and measurably improve our innovation success rates. 3M, of course, is still around and doing a brilliant job of it. Nortel Networks, meanwhile, hit a brick wall, tripped over its own shoelaces and died. It wasn't my fault, I'd already left, but hey-ho. So there are lots of types of innovation. I don't have the word horizontal up here, but clearly the MIT Innovation Lab is an example of working across different industries to gain insights into how to do better innovation within a particular area. We called it open innovation, or sometimes network innovation. But of course, we talk about all different kinds of innovation, most important being business model innovation, because quite frankly, if your technological innovation or your supply chain innovation or whatever innovation you're talking about around the edges there, if it doesn't touch the business model such that it delivers value as experienced by your customers, and ultimately, therefore, value for other stakeholders of the enterprise, then it isn't innovation. Can't be, because I define innovation as manifesting net new value, more value than you have to invest to create the value. Right? So it's all about ROI, and it's all about business models, or value delivery model, to use a more inclusive term, because I like to think that our governments and charities can also learn to innovate. So it isn't just about commercial success. So horizontal innovation. Hey, I agree, some of the best ideas happen when we sleep. And clearly the brain is an amazing thing, and we often will go to bed with a problem that's keeping us awake, and we'll wake up with an insight or a solution. So I'm a big believer in horizontal innovation. But I'd like to just remind us, we've been looking at things like benchmarking for years, right? Benchmarking, comparing apples and oranges, looking at other industries or other business models or other sectors of human enterprise to gain insights that help us improve in our own sector or industry or business. A couple of quick examples. You're probably already familiar with the fact that the airline industry, of course, borrowed insights from motorsport to figure out how to turn the planes around quicker, how to get in there and maintain them, do what they needed to do, and get them back in the air when they're making money. The airline industry, after the horrible disaster in Tenerife, also looked at the nuclear power industry and changed communication protocols in the cockpit to avoid similar disasters caused by random chit-chat and miscommunication. And now the health industry worldwide is looking at the airline industry to change communication protocols in operating theaters. Because we still, just in English-speaking countries alone, States, UK, Canada, where I originally come from, Australia, New Zealand, just English-speaking countries, we lose almost 250,000 people every year by accident, right? They're killed in hospitals. Not nice. So innovation certainly isn't about sitting around and waiting for a good idea to show up. You can't afford to be blinkered. And sorry, these are the images that came up when I Googled blinkered people. So ideas come from surprising places. Okay? And most especially, ideas for innovation often come from engaging with customers. Because in fact, we only ever get to experience or deliver value in relationships. Right? Think about it. Now, it doesn't have to be the end customer. It can be colleagues. Everybody's a customer, right? We are servants of everyone we're in relationship to. And hopefully, we're delivering, creating, manifesting value in each and every one of the relationships that we're engaged in. And so innovation can be a living, breathing thing, right? That's a business model. And it can happen in real time if we relate effectively to other people and figure out how to impart value to them, how to improve their experience of us. Okay? So it's all about relationships. And it's all about engaging this thing, right? The most complex structure in the known universe. So this is where we experience value. This is where we get ideas on how to create value. What we often see, of course, especially in technology organizations like Nortel and Oracle, where I've worked, and many others, is what I call technology push, right? And we've heard other people refer to it here, where clever technology people come up with solutions and say, I've got a solution. They throw it over the wall, right? And say, now you guys in marketing and sales, go and figure out how to commercialize this. Go find the person, go find the customer with the problem and figure out how much they will pay for my wonderful solution. Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and directly try and address the point about barriers to successful horizontal innovation, or indeed any kind of innovation, but I'll try and give it a horizontal slant. So it starts with mindset. And successful innovation, all successful innovation, starts with what I call the restless dissatisfaction of the entrepreneurial mind, and which that can be intrapreneurial as well if you want to think about people working in organizations. But fundamentally, it's about being unhappy with the way things are and wanting to do something about it. Okay? It's walking into work every day and, like Walt Disney, finding fault and pointing out things that need to change and improve. But Walt Disney's a perfect example of the entrepreneurial paradox, where the entrepreneurial mindset is both, on the one hand, the glass is half empty, restlessly dissatisfied, and yet hopeful and optimistic and believing that we can continue to fill it up. Okay, so that's the entrepreneur's paradox. Secondly, of course, it's about getting out of the box. It's about getting out of the box of your own mind, right? Getting out of your own skull, getting out of your own mental paradigms and assumptions. It's about getting away from your desk. I mean, Google's 20%. I was speaking with a senior Google person recently, and they reckon now that about 90% of their commercial success right now is driven by their 20% investment in people not doing their jobs, right? So get out of your job, get out of your cubicle, get out of your walls of your organization. The great ideas for innovation aren't going to come from within the R&D lab. They'll get implemented there, okay, but they're going to come from insights that come from outside. either looking at other industries, looking at other organizations, looking at other disciplines, looking at customers. Okay? And again, with customers, understanding customers is a complex thing, right? The mind, again, is extremely complex. So you can't just ask them, well, what do you need? What are you going to need in 10 years? Right? How's your environment going to change with all this stuff like the IoT and AI and so on coming down the pipeline? How's your job going to change? How's your world going to change? They don't know any more than I do or you do. Okay? So we've got to get out of the box of our mental paradigms that constrain how we think. And fundamentally, of course, that's what, in a way, what horizontal innovation is all about. But it's a difficult thing. Right? It's very difficult to give up our preconceptions or stop seeing the world like an engineer or like a psychologist. Right? We all have our own paradigms. Next, it's about creating the right leadership culture. And of course, this is how not to do it. Right? We've heard a lot of people talk about the critical importance of empowering experimentation and failing quickly and making mistakes. In fact, there are lots of companies that I've worked for, 3M's an example, they won't promote someone to a position of a business line president or GM unless they can personally point to a rather expensive mistake that they hold their hand up and say, I did that. So you can work hard for years and years to create a culture where people are empowered to experiment and make mistakes and fail, and you can ruin it in a second or two by firing someone for daring to speak up or daring to disagree with the CEO or whatever. Of course, the heart of it is relationships, and the goal is collaborative win-win relationships, right? If you can, and that's the great difficulty with horizontal innovation or collaborative innovation or open innovation or whatever you want to call it. When you get different organizations working together on alliances of any kind, partnering and attempting to come up with a win-win model, very often there are unstated hidden agendas and different motivators, et cetera, that need to be understood, that need to be teased out and brought to the fore so that you can create the right partnership. And again, that's true in any relationship, right? If somebody's in a relationship with another person and they have kind of their own agenda and it isn't truly win-win, then it's not going to be successful. Next is the realm of communication. And communication is vital in any innovation effort, but it's especially difficult in horizontal innovation where you're trying to reach across these long span bridges to build effective relationships. So it's hard at the best of times to be clear and concise and effective in our communications, and human beings, all of us, are getting sloppier with it, right? It's like OMG, WTF, all these sorts of things. We're getting sloppier and sloppier with our communication. And how often have you stood in a pub, right, where everybody's there not talking to each other, right? What's the point of pubs if we're not there to socialize? So, my lower right, one of my big pet peeves with email, right? We got barrage of email, and lots of companies, Oracle included, Atos, others, recognizing that email is probably one of the biggest single negative impacts to human productivity at the moment because of all the shit we get and all the useless copies. And it takes, if everybody in Oracle copies Larry Ellison, then it takes his 6 secretaries, hours and hours to hit the delete button, get rid of it all. It's just it's a massive time sink. So communication is vitally important, and of course it's even more difficult when you're communicating, say, if I'm, as a psychologist, trying to communicate to an engineer, or you got a mechanical guy communicating to an electrical guy, whatever, right? It's even more challenging, so it's important to take the time to do it effectively, and most people don't. And next is really the realm of entrepreneurial mindset again. It's having a vision. But it's not just that restless dissatisfaction. It's now actually having a plan. And ultimately, of course, for any innovation, if it's not making the world a better place, if it's not improving your business model, if it's not creating customer value, if it's not improving something, then why the hell are you doing it? And ultimately, it all ties to purpose. It ties to what drives us, passion. What are we passionate about? And I think if in any innovation, if we're not focused on creating more value, and it isn't just about the money, it's much more about the love. If we're not thinking about how to improve someone's experience of value so that they love us, they love our product, they love our brand, they love our relationship, right? If it's not manifesting that, then it's pointless. So now is where I shamelessly plug my book, which looks at 7 aspects of human nature that link to 7 key aspects of strategy and identify the root causes for why we have such low innovation success rates across most sectors. And could have called it the 7 virtues because, of course, for every sin there's a virtue. I hope in talking through the challenges to horizontal innovation, I've given you at least a little flavor of what those virtues are and what some of the corresponding sins are that tend to undermine our efforts. I'd certainly welcome any connections if you want to get a hold of me by email or LinkedIn or whatever. And I hope I spoke quickly enough that I left time for questions. Good. Thank you.
Okay, time for some questions for Dave. I love that introductory video. It's hilarious. Okay, any questions? I've got one to kick off. We talked about, I think there was a sort of chuckle went round the audience about our inboxes are full of shit. In that, in the digital era, more and more information, I have a personal view, we're all drowning in it. It's clouding our judgment. I just like to get a view from the professional on this matter.
Yeah, well, absolutely. One of the problems that I already alluded to is the fact that we all spend so much time engaging, this thing, texting people from halfway around the world and not engaging, or instead of getting up and walking around the cubicle, saying, "Boy, this email chain here, 150 emails so far and still rocketing upwards. Why don't we just sit down and talk to each other, right? Because by talking to each other, we can often solve problems or learn things or get insights that we're not going to get mucking about with our iPhones or our tapping away on our keyboards. So part of it's a productivity issue, but of course, ineffective communication is also fundamentally a relationship issue. It's no accident that you've got these 7 things and they all connect and they all relate. So if you've got poor communication, you're not going to be able to relate effectively. You're not going to drill down and understand what your motivations are and what you're trying to achieve together in a relationship. So communication, in fact, I think communication is often the fundamental problem. One of my favorite bosses at Nortel used to say, and we're supposedly a communication leader, used to say we've got 3 problems here: communication, communication, and communication. And if we can solve that, we'll be far more effective as a business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've seen some pretty strong messages that there's no magic formula here. This is about empowering people, better communication.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point. I've often said to organizations when I go in to work with them, they sometimes seem to want me to have a magic wand that I can wave and suddenly, sprinkle fairy dust on everyone, and all of a sudden everything will start working. And of course, it isn't like that. Human beings aren't like that. We're on the one hand, I think we're wired to want to innovate. We're wired with a kind of an entrepreneurial spirit to some extent, and it gets beaten out of us in our education and in our lives. But we're wired to do good things, and yet we're also, once we start to get programmed in a particular way, we're very difficult to change, especially when you get to be my age, say about old dogs and new tricks. So the point is we develop bad habits, and then those habits become very, very difficult to change. And as organizations, once we've developed a certain kind of culture, it becomes harder and harder to change that DNA. And many organizations really have DNA that's really actively, has antibodies and resistance to innovation. Well, that wasn't invented here. We don't want to hear that.
We have heard about it's easier to do it across sector than often within.
Yeah,
the
that's right.
constraints of an
It's often that
organisation.
insight that'll come from outside that'll be vital. Yeah.
Question from down here.
I always love to hear talks on this subject. It's probably one of the most important parts of our work is communicating, and one of the areas that I've always found a challenge is personality types. Because we have a variety of different people, we don't often get a choice who we want to work with. I mean, in your experience of business over the years, I mean, how have you dealt with that? What's the successful formula for personality typing or joining people together?
When I work with organizations, I often employ quite a wide range of psychometric devices because on the one hand, I'll say I always take the data with a pinch of salt. I don't think there's any such thing as an absolutely accurate psychometric device. However, I always like to do it because it gives me insights into the people in the organization, on the leadership team, on the board, or whoever, that I can then sort of poke in the right places to see what kind of reactions I get. And it's, I mean, you take one, like Myers-Briggs, for example, is probably the grandmother of psychometric devices, and it's a brilliant one. And a lot of other ones are just derivatives of it that are colored up and made fancy and pretty and so on.
Is that the one that looks like the spider diagram?
No.
No.
That is one of the fancy ones. Myers-Briggs is just a 2 by 2 by 2 by 2.
Oh, yeah.
And introvert, extrovert, so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. But it's 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. But what a lot of people don't understand is it's gray. It's not black and white. So on any particular scale, like introvert and extrovert, most of us are a combination. And in fact, most introverts have learned to adopt extrovert behaviors. And if you're in the middle, that's actually a very, very different thing than if you're an extreme extrovert or an extreme introvert. So the fact is it's many shades of gray, and it's not just 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. But the point I'm trying to get to is that one of the things I often point out with teams is, okay, you've got a team here, you've got a leadership team, you've got an organization, possibly thousands of people, but lots of smaller, SMEs, lots of smaller organizations, or indeed boards. If you look at it, they have probably just a few of the personality types. And I always like to point out the ones they're missing, because diversity, again, getting out of the box, right, building those long bridges, it's all about diversity and embracing diversity and learning from diversity. That's what horizontal innovation is all about. So if you've got a leadership team where you have an ENTJ CEO or whatever, and he's recruited an ENTJ CFO, and they've INTJ CMO, et cetera, you don't have diversity, right? And if you don't have diversity, just think of all those perspectives that you're missing. So I love doing that exercise with organizations and just pointing out, hey, who isn't sat around this table, right? What ideas don't we have being expressed here? Who isn't challenging us and our prevailing thinking as a leadership team? So.
But in your work, have you found whether left brain or right brain thinkers are any more predisposed to think freely? I mean, there is.
Well, I think left brain and right brain perspectives are extremely important. And in my book, I look at the 7 different core elements, but I also line them up down each side of the brain. And I use that to relate the concept of the 10 personas of the 10 innovation personas that IDEO talks about. They identify 10 different characters, and then they identify the bad guy as being the devil's advocate, right? So you've got 10 good characters or good personas that contribute to innovation, and you've got one really bad one, the devil's advocate, that, get rid of those. Well, hello, I actually think devil's advocates are extremely important to the innovation process. And so they become 11, and there's 3 more that they're missing. So there end up being a total of 14 different important elements. And I'm not claiming that any one person is just one of these 14 things. Again, we're all, these things are extremely complex. But the bottom line, yeah, left brain and right brain is important, but both are important. I don't like this notion that some people have that it's the right brain that's creative and the left brain that's just verbal. And I'm messing everything up today, aren't I?
I'd be fairly relaxed about that if I were you.
Okay, but
It's back vertical
so
now.
I think both sides of our head are actually equally important.
Okay. Right. Any other questions? All right. On that note, Dave, very interesting and very different insight. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.